Hey everybody, I'm Sean Robinson.
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line. What's up, Sean? We haven't done one of these in a minute.
It's been a while. It's been a while. We kind of bank them these days, right? Uh,
Yeah.
save up a bunch of Fridays and/or Saturdays. And one of the more recent videos that we did, that I quite enjoyed, and I thought it would be fun to revisit, was watching the gentleman who we're going to be talking about today actually get to draw. And
hmm
I don't know about you, but the first time that I encountered Junji Ito, uh,
hmm
I was, he kind of gives you the sense that you're in the presence of somebody who is the complete package, which I don't think is really common with a lot of cartoonists. I think so many of the people that I enjoy like one aspect of them, or I enjoy them despite all these other things.
Yeah.
Uh, he's somebody who really struck me as being the complete package, and I think one of the reasons is the very story that we're going to be looking at today.
What
Um,
what was the first Junji Ito thing that you read? Do you
well,
remember?
I would have to. I'm pretty sure it was a Uzumaki or Spiral. Um,
Okay.
because it was that was serialized in Pulp, which was the Viz short-lived Viz like adult anthology that they published in English in I think maybe '97 to 2002 or something. Very very interesting and for the time very daring publication that they did in English, and it would have like culture essays. They'd talk about Japanese film. They'd talk about different types of there'd be like I don't know, like an essay about Shinjuku, the area of Tokyo where people like fashion district where people dress up and go hang out
Interesting.
and stuff like that. So it was like a very kind of bold thing for the English language manga market at the time.
Yeah.
And they ran a lot of really amazing stuff in there. They ran Uzumaki. They ran the short story that we're going to look at today, also by Junji Ito. They ran stuff by what's her name? She's really well known now. She does like Marvel variant covers and things like that.
Oh, the Peach
Yeah,
Momoko?
you're right. Exactly. Yeah.
Really?
Uh
Back
huh.
then. Okay.
Yeah, and really really interesting, stuff that sort of had not been exposed so far, and in the English market, and uh,
And there goes Sean's bag of coins. Because in Saint Paul, everyone deals in bags of silver and gold.
yeah, I mean it was a huge amount of stuff, and some of it was earlier stuff, some of it was kind of catering to the tastes of the English market, like they had like Ikigami.
hmm
They had a Ikigami cereal in there that was quite unusual, and I'm trying to remember the name of that one. And they would.
Ikegami's someone that they need. We need like an Ikegami library. None of his stuff's in print anymore. He's too good to not be in print in English anymore.
Yeah, no, and he was also, he also stunning artist and came out at a time where the print reproduction was not so hot.
Yeah.
So, a lot of the English language ones that do exist, like Crying Freeman and stuff, don't look particularly good in English.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously there's no reason that that's the case other than the fact that they were done in a, suboptimal way in a pre-digital era. But yeah, he's awesome. Really interesting guy, and yeah. So they tried out a bunch of different stuff in this, and Ito was one of the ones that I was just like really blown away by, in terms of his just overall craftsmanship, in terms of his drive, in terms of his ability to take a situation and synthesize something that feels, I mean, kind of mimetic, you know.
Yeah.
He has the ability to like look at life situations and take things from the real world, but turn them into a sort of mimetic device where you can just lay it over lots of different situations and pull something new out of it. Um,
Yeah, that's what I was so impressed like rereading this thing today is I felt like it's horrific on a number of levels. But I'm it's cool. I didn't realize you were that OG of a Junji Ito fan because I only became aware of him like with like in the I don't know last 5 years or so, it seems like he's all of a sudden exploded in popularity, and all my students talk about him and stuff. I had first tried to read Tome, and I really didn't like that one. It was just too gross and nasty. And then actually Gio, which is the volume I have here that the story we're going to look at is in, I despise that story. I just think there's nothing interesting about it. It's just like farts and burps and body horror, and it's just gross to me. I didn't get it. So I almost jumped off the Junji Ito train, but the story that's collected in here just as a short story in the end, I don't know why it's in this volume. It has nothing to do with the rest of the story. I was like, wait a second. Now this is good. Like, is there more stuff like this? So I've given him more tries and wound up realizing that I somehow just got probably the two worst, or the two that lean into gore and disgusting instead
Yeah,
of
and
the psychological aspects.
I think
And
it's worth
I
worth
get it
saying too.
now.
Yeah, well, and also, there he definitely has people who respond to those much stronger than they do the material that's interesting to me. So,
Yeah.
you know, far be it for me to yuck some yums. I think that he's a pretty seems pretty driven by his interests.
Yeah.
A lot is made about how he was a dental technician, before his first published work. But there's a certain kind of medical professionalism. Dentists oftentimes have this sort of thing where specialists in particular, where they don't have to necessarily have all of the sort of human interaction like glad handing, like baby kissing, handshaking kind of skills,
Yeah.
because they're so good at their specialty.
I think
I mean,
we've
I have
both
no
been
idea.
experiencing that in our personal life quite a bit lately, dealing with the
Sure.
we've been getting really lucky. We finally found some doctors that are good, but we went through a number of doctors that, yeah, they're like one of them. We talked to another doctor. Oh, we saw this guy, and he said, "How many words did he say to you?" Like that's just the guy's reputation. So 100% know what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Um,
Um,
well, I mean, I actually don't know anything about it personally at all, but that sort of has been in the back of my head when I considered that occupational aspect.
that removed sense of the body, where like the viscera of it is its own kind of interest.
Yeah, like you can be interested in it in the same way that you would be interested in like a pattern on a rug
Yeah.
or something. You look at the nerves and all you see is a bunch of lines that are attached to each other in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's the actual story we're talking about, the Enigma of Amigara Fault.
And this is the one that absolutely, at the end of Gio, not enjoying any of it, but reading it all the way through because I had paid for it. I figured I should finish the book. And this story, like, this was the first Junji Ito book I actually owned. I had gotten, someone had lent me a copy of Tome, and I didn't even finish it. This is the story that made me say, I'm gonna buy more of this guy's stuff, because it tapped so much into some of my own fears, like claustrophobia, some of my own worst nightmares. But I think on rereading it also, I think there's some really interesting social commentary in this one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad we're taking a peek back at it. But we'll just go. I didn't make notes on this one like we usually
Yeah.
do. We'll just kind of flip through and talk about what it is as we go.
And compared to something, some of his long form works, like, I brought up Uzumaki, which, is probably thousands of pages. This is very, very compressed. So he gives you the setup of the story and very efficiently in just a few panels here, where essentially there's an earthquake in a anonymous blanked out town. And there's a fault that opens up in the earth, and people are coming to meet near inside the fault. And the reason that we find out fairly soon is that there are human-shaped holes inside of the fault. And there's our first view at those right
Yeah,
there.
and even just that as an image is
Yeah.
so, like, something about that so freaky, with the sense that they're floating. They're floating up, they're moving away, but also like the locked in rigidity of it. He's given enough details around the edges where it's not just silhouettes. You can tell that they're deep. And especially as you head to this kind of imagery here, where he's doing a really good job of projecting that silhouette backwards in the third dimension to make these infinitely deep holes. I think that is, yeah, just to me, as someone who's mildly claustrophobic, that is absolutely fucking terrifying already.
Right. And yeah, so we're terrified by it, but the people who are gathered around it are not terrified. They are fascinated by it. And we start to get the idea here that there might be something, obviously something going on. And these guys who were there, the geologists who were there trying to study it, are putting in these feelers, like 30-meter long fiber cables that they're trying to run in there, and they're not hitting the end of anything. And they're just speculating, like, what in the world could this be? Like, these must be ancient. Like, what, who in the world could have had the technology to make something like this?
And that's like the first level of horror. That's the thing that I really appreciate about this is there's this unearthed ancient like idea that there's something bigger than the human species, that there's technologies that existed before us and cultures or aliens that have, there's that kind of existential horror of us not being the apex of the evolution chain that we think we are, that I think this suggests, and that gets layered on top of these other horrors as the story goes. That is a terrifying image to me.
Yeah. Yeah, being able to peer through that human-shaped hole into the other humans, like peering out on the other side of it. And then, yeah, like every time he shows one of those, as you were saying, he's rendering it in such a way, the projection of it's not just a silhouette, you're seeing the deep space that's beneath or, but beyond the thing itself.
And the cross contour lines, I mean, those
Yeah.
get better as they go, as you get deeper into the holes, which you see on this page here. This guy, who I think even just in the way he's constructed his face, is an eerie looking
Yeah.
character. As far as I could tell, in the context of the story, he's the first person who these people have all been drawn there because not only because it's such a strange thing, but they start saying that most of them are there because when they saw footage on TV, they spied a hole that they knew was them. They knew it was their
Right.
shape, that it matched them. And he's saying this, and at least in the context of the story, he's the first person that then is like, I'm going to prove it to you, and squishes himself into the hole. And no,
The slip.
would you, if you saw this in nature, would you like go up enough just to test
No,
it?
no. I couldn't get close enough. I couldn't get any distance from it. I might have mentioned this to you before, but I actually have I'll get vertigo being near a train that's moving fast, because
Oh,
I feel the sensation as if I'm being pulled into it. Uh, and this is actually one of the first little bits here in the story that I actually have a strong identification with. When you see him actually entering the hole there, and you see him pass through, that is actually like similar to the sensation that I feel. I actually feel this on the side of buildings as well. Anytime that I perceive that death would only be, a few feet of motion on my part, I feel as though I'm kind of pitching towards the thing.
oh,
Um,
like, do you get the thing where you're like tempted to swerve off of like a cliff? I
yeah,
know
exactly.
I've never had that, but
It's it's it's
a
it's
few
not like
people that I've dated have told me that they see a cliff and they feel like the urge to go
yes,
over it.
yeah. It's not that I want to do that, and it's not that I actually think I'll do it. It's the sensate, like my orientation in space makes me feel as though I am doing the thing, like I'm approaching it, like it's happening. Um,
Oh,
that
okay.
that could be
I always took it as like the possibility made itself so present to them
right.
that they felt it as an urge rather than just like, oh yeah, like one could fall off the cliff.
Yeah, maybe other people were like that, but yeah, that's my particular phenomenon. Anyway, this
Interesting.
this this looks like that to me, like that when I see this guy just submitting to it, like that. But then if you look at his face here, he's happy, he's satisfied, he's not horrified by this right here. But
No, and that's terrifying to me as well, and I think leads to we'll talk about more at the end, but leads to kind of one of the other things I think that's horrifying about this. But to me, it's the idea of this thing that fits you so perfect that there's no more room, and then just the thought of like slow, like I'll actually watch like videos of people spelunking, and that's like a scary movie
oh,
to me, like that
yeah.
shit freaks me out. And this is the ultimate like spelunk that you have just enough room to keep wiggling forward in your own
Oh,
silhouette.
man.
And so people try, and I think he is the first guy to go in because they start to mount rescue efforts, and they put the camera in there, and they find that he has gone past the depths of where the camera can even go. So he's really wiggled himself way into this
Yeah.
cliff.
And then the man who there's the man and a woman who have met each other here, dreams that he is the man who's entered the cliff, and dreams that he's screaming in horror, and that he's been drawn further and further in, and that the hole has been deformed so that he's stuck in the middle of it. And look at that last "anyone help me" image there with his arms in the trough like that. I mean,
Yeah.
just absolutely like the stuff of nightmares. I mean, the worst dream you could possibly have. It's perfectly
And
rendered.
the idea that like not only is it like stuck to him, but that he can move forward to some extent. Or is that later on? No,
Yeah,
that's later
yeah,
on. Okay, I won't go there
yeah.
yet. But yeah, that's my ultimate nightmare. Like being able to not move, like being buried alive or something like
Sure.
that is just terrible to me.
So then
Um,
he wakes up and he's like, okay, well, look, I'm it's just a dream, thank God. And he and the girl go out, and she's like, well, I found my hole. He's like, what the fuck are you talking about? She's like, well, this is mine. Here it is. And he's like, well, it kind of looks like you. She's like, it's identical. This is me.
yeah.
And she's actually reluctant. Like, she shows reluctance, although obviously getting closer to it as she's being reluctant. And the guy wants to preserve her, and he fills it up with rocks.
Well, before we switch to that, I want to say
Yeah,
out of
sorry.
all the cliff drawings,
Yeah.
this one I really, really like because something about where the hatching and everything lays, it
Hmm.
plays that trick that if you've ever seen a mask that's lit from the back and you turn it over and it looks like you're seeing it from the front, he's
Right.
captured that angle
Yeah.
pretty well where it's almost this three-dimensional presence that's coming at them rather
Right.
than a hole. And the flipping of those two things, the kind of figure ground reversal happening there, not quite figure ground reversal, but
Hmm.
the spatial reversal happening there makes that drawing extra ominous to me as well.
Yeah, and
And
all
then,
that cross contour work, he just goes nuts with in Uzumaki. By the way, I think this was either done prior to Uzumaki or during it. But he makes good use of that.
yeah,
Uh,
I need to read that still.
yeah,
People are
it's
gonna
fantastic.
shit on me for not reading it yet.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. One of the greats. So yeah. So this other guy is also saying, "This is my hole. It was made for me." But the way that he's got, look at the expression on his face there as he's looking back at that perfect combination of excitement and terror. You know.
Yeah, and like this, the fanaticism
Yep.
in this, and then these ones where they're like halfway in are the most disturbing to me.
Yeah.
Like they've just lost their personality almost. Like they're just, I don't know. It's so strange to have a guy just like plugged in halfway up a
Yeah.
wall. Such an unsettling image. Yeah, here he is plugging up her hole.
Yeah. My
Trying,
silhouette saying, "Come into me."
yeah, which is
Yeah.
I wonder if in Japanese it has the same kind of double entendre, the
Oh,
sexual double entendre or
yeah.
not.
I'm sure. Yeah. I don't know about the sexual. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's intentional. I mean, even the name of the cliff thing means like what's that? Empty shell or something.
Okay.
Um, Yeah, so I mean, all this stuff is really carefully considered. But yeah, he piles up these little these little rocks. Yeah, now you're safe.
Thank
There's
you,
C.
Protector Man.
Now you're safe. I plugged it up. And
I plugged your hole.
exactly right, yeah. And then, they have a conversation, um this conversation, can't help but feeling it's not incidental. I've always been alone ever since I was a child. My parents didn't care about me, neither did my friends. And he's like pulling the old one, but I care about you.
Yeah.
um but you have to wonder what the commonality is with all of these people who have gathered in this spot. Are they just randomly seeing themselves? Is there something else about them that you know is drawn to the spot? And then we have another nightmare, which at this point you might start thinking, the fault itself might be causing some of this. And in the
Yeah.
nightmare, it's that it's ancient people who are punishing other people to be put in there, um, and that's the purpose for it. In his nightmare, it's people being punished to be placed in there. It doesn't mean that those people dug the hole themselves, but that's what they're doing. And
Yeah.
then in the dream, uh, as it continues, he sees the guy being deformed, uh, like drawn in, but being pulled like taffy or something.
Well, it's basically taking this idea of like foot binding or neck stretching that you do get in cultures where they'll progressively put more rings on the neck to stretch it out. And so, like, as these people are stuck in this for a giant length of time and they just slowly wriggle themselves forward, the body just slowly conforms to that shape. I think about it almost like a human equivalent of the bonsai tree, where the whole
Mhm.
is just kind of manipulating it. Or early days of internet, you had those like cats in jars memes. They would like
Right.
they'd fake this cats growing in jars, and that image like extra terrifies me even more than being stuck. It's like this inevitable stuck forward, and I think that's where another layer of horror comes from, is that's life. Like you're just stuck in this track and you can only head forward, and it pulls you and shapes you and morphs you from, your original shape that you started out in. Like I just think of each one of these holes as a person's life, and that's fucking terrifying. And I think that goes back to what you were asking about here with why these certain people or whatever. There is like a whole social commentary about the paths that your genetics set you on, the paths that your environment sets you on, like the holes that you fit into in life, the personas that you occupy and everything. And you can't help but being drawn to who you are, but then as you go through it, like you're stuck in it and it morphs you. Like I think to me, beyond all it extends the claustrophobia to just the fact of existing,
Right.
and that is fucking horrific. And I feel that all the time. Like I didn't ask to be here. My parents chose to have a kid, and then we're kind of
Mm.
just on this inertia forward, and you're out of control. This complete lack of control in any of this, it can be very frustrating from day to day.
Right.
And I think the story sums it up, which is why I obviously I haven't read everything of his, but I have a hard time finding any of his stories more terrifying than this one.
Right. Well, Uzumaki will give it a run for the money, but yeah, it's
Okay.
yeah. So he wakes up, of course, to find that the girl has dug her the rubble out and has probably gone in as well. And man, we get another show off shot here, just incredible rendering when he's got the flashlight with the harsher lighting.
Yeah, I love that lighting. And that's another one of those that kind of flip flops itself every now and then.
Right.
And then it gets really awful. He finds his own hole, after he loses the woman that it seems like he's falling in love with.
Right.
There's that bit too, there's a bit of that going on in there. And then on the other side of the mountain, they finally several months later, it says we find these completely randomly shaped fissures.
Yeah, they're not human shaped.
And as they look inside, his dream has come true.
I see something. It's slowly coming this way.
And what a horrific, like, this is where his drawing ability, this is a pretty understated story in terms of how gnarly his images can be.
Hmm.
And I think the fact that he saves the gnarliest one for the last was another thing that really appealed to me about this story. Whereas the majority of this book, the Gyo story, is just kind of gnarly, gross shit all the time. This payoff there of this build of the impending doom, I think, was more impactful to me.
Yeah, one of the things that I sort of maintain about this type of story in general, uh, mythic stories, is that their generality and your ability to sort of apply them to lots of situations is one of their strengths.
Hmm.
That this is not an analogy for a war or an indictment of the Reagan administration.
Yeah.
Do you know
No.
what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I'm able to project like this other reading that I have on it that coincides with my own like
Right.
discomfort with being like just stuck in reality with no real control over my situation. These are the holes that the ancestors potentially dug and stuff. Like I can map all of that onto my fear, but you were mapping it onto a totally different
Yeah.
experience that you
Well,
have.
let's go face to face, and I'll tell you my theory. So here's what I mean about the general applicability of this type of specific personal mythology. Uh, I have always thought about this story that this story is about people's art interests,
Hmm.
or specifically any other type of interest that people have that they are fixated on and that they pursue throughout their lives.
Oh,
That
okay.
an art, let's just say an artist for a second, right? And that the process of finding and deciding that one is going to pursue their art, specifically the things that drive them, is actually a process of recognizing within this sort of cataclysmic landscape, recognizing the hole that they fit into, and then just smashing themselves in and giving themselves up to pursuing that thing doggedly from there.
No matter how it changes you or distorts you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I think that's like a more specific view of like the thing I'm saying, that there's these paths that we feel like kind of destined to. And you can have debates over nature and nurture and all of that stuff. And I think that's put in there. There's the nature component. There's also the ancestral component. There's also the, a previous society kind of component to it. Um, yeah, and it's just like I don't know if anyone who really thinks about life doesn't feel that stuckness at some point. Like I think it's one of the funny things about today's society where people have this idea that you can just like I could just choose not to be that person anymore and I could drop everything and I could go be a farmer tomorrow and no longer an artist. Like that's your choice to make. And it's like really? Like you got to be the person who wants to go be the farmer. Like I'm probably not going to do that. Like I don't buy that idea that people can just change everything about who they are at the drop of the dime. And if they do it, then they were this type of person who was predetermined that they were a person who could drop
Right.
at the turn of a dime.
Yeah,
Um,
and think part of that opinion for me is based on the reaction of the characters to it. It's not just like sad inevitability, like oh shit, I guess I'm embracing this now. It's also like the glee that some of them have as they enter into it.
well, because there's so many people. I mean, I'm sure you were this way too, but like when I was a kid in high school, I was the really rare person who already knew what I wanted to do. Like, and still, I mean, my students that are in their 20s and stuff, they're like, what are you interested in? What do you do? Like, I'm trying to get them to paint a poster right now in one of my classes, trying to get them to make a little painting that speaks to their personal identity. And they'll like, it's an art appreciation. They've never done art before. So they're like, I don't even know how to come up with an idea. It's like, well, make a list of the things you like. And those lists are so like they just don't know, they don't have it yet. And for some people that's distressing, but I think a lot of people really desire that, like, who am I, and are seeking that. So of
Yeah.
course when you find it, you're like, oh yeah.
Right. Here
But
I go.
I guess when you're like us and you've had it all your life and you've pursued it as doggedly as we have, there is a warping, there's sacrifice that goes into it, and
Yeah.
you're trapped. Like you've put too much into this to back out now. You can't back out of the whole of 40 some odd years of pursuing comics. Like you've put too much time into that. You better keep going for a while at least.
I'm sure that a comic collector would tell me this is a metaphor for comic collecting. By the way, you
Yeah.
know, that's the strength of it. I mean, I guess that's the larger thing that I'm saying is that these types of ideas, when you frame them in a way that doesn't pin it down so specifically, it gives the reader an ability to sort of read into it.
But
Which
he also doesn't commit the sin of being um it's not so universal and generalized that you can't make it specifically about your thing. A
right,
lot of people commit that sin too, where they make the thing too much of a obvious one-liner where you're
right,
like, oh, they're talking about, I guess that's what you're saying about
yeah.
this is about the Reagan administration. Um
That's the
but
worst kind. I mean, absolutely.
yeah.
I really enjoyed Animal Farm until I read commentary on it that suggested that every animal had a specific real world analog. And it's like, well, why did I even read the fucking thing? Write me a 3 paragraph essay about it instead, dude.
But
Like,
it's not so specific either that it's about him in his room being a miserable comics creator.
right,
He's found the perfect balance of universal and so specific that no one else would ever come up with this idea. And
right.
that's his power.
Yeah.
And reading more of his short stories, he has so many of those.
Mm-hmm.
Very specific, but very universal and very no one else has ever thought of this before. It's not a ghost story or a vampire story.
Right, and I think it's a rare attribute, but that does bring me to the thing that we were also thinking about in relation to this episode, which is that there are a few other historic horror creators who had that similar kind of power, and I think like Kazuo Umezu is a really fine example of that. I mean, Drifting Classroom is another one of those types of ideas. Drifting Classroom, he just found one of those things, and instead of making it a 20-page short story, he made it into a 3,000-page horrific serial.
Yeah.
And it speaks to you in a similar kind of way, where everybody who I know who has read it has a similar kind of like, well, it really seemed real to me. There's something
Yeah.
about it that like gets you, even though it's this fantasy thing. And I know that Umezu was a influence on Junji Ito. We've mentioned before, but Living the Line is going to be doing a series of historical manga and genre manga, and starting with some horror titles. And a lot of the titles I think are going to end up being horror-ish or horror adjacent. One of the, this book actually came to our attention. It was reprinted recently in Japan, and actually Ito actually blurbed it, which he called a frightening but moving story about an unfortunate individual who, lost in search of his true self, finds his own annihilation instead.
Mm-hmm.
Which is an interesting take on it. So this is Her Frankenstein by Kawashima Norikazu, and Kawashima, he was a manga artist who actually worked in shoujo manga. So he worked for this publisher called Hibari that put out tons of books a month, and they were all aimed at the young girls market. And he was, apparently one of their popular artists, and his titles were reprinted a lot and things like that. But it was all book releases, and it was all done for these small books. And it was almost like a periodical in the sense that they came out frequently enough that they'd like print like girls' letters and put them on the inside of the front cover of the book and things like that. And obviously there were favorite authors and things like that, but they weren't series, they weren't serialized. These were all one shot 180-page books.
Huh.
And he ended up being one of the last artists of that lineage. And it's funny, like, Junji Ito's career started in 1987. Well, 87, I believe, is the same. Maybe he made it to 88. I'm not sure if it was 87 or 88, was the last year that Norikazu Kawashima ended up working as well, because Hibari shut down. This market got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, but he was like funneled into it by the system. He was this amazing creator making these wacky books ostensibly aimed at girls and having girl protagonists and things like that, but really, really wild and psychologically compelling, and obviously had his own, really deep-seated like convictions of what was interesting and what type of horror. There are certain motifs, I won't give into it because they're actually in this book, but there are certain motifs that are repeated through half a dozen of his books.
So the type of content, because I've read the
Mhm.
proofs of that, the digital proofs of Her Frankenstein. The type of story that's in there was typical of his, aimed at young girls. That story seems like a really wild story to be putting in a shoujo.
No, I think most of his earlier ones are have girl protagonists, and maybe are slightly closer to a formula, such as it is. I mean, this is a fairly personal formula, but no, I think as the the impression I get. I mean, I don't know anything about the interior politics of this stuff, but I think the impression I get is as the sales dwindled and as he was one of the last people doing this, that he just did more of whatever the hell he wanted to do.
Okay.
And so Her Frankenstein actually came out in 86. And so this is in the tail end of this as a market. But the thing is that, as far as like the Tokyo editors were concerned or whatever, doing one-off books didn't prep you for doing serialized stuff. So even though he was like a compelling horror artist, he didn't have like a post Hibari career.
Wow. They just didn't
that,
think he was the right kind of artist for it.
well,
That's crazy.
It's a different thing, I guess. Pacing a 180-page book versus drawing, a 20-page a month or 20-page a week serial. It's a different thing.
But I mean, you gotta let a dude try. Like, maybe he's been waiting to tell a longer story. That's crazy.
So that was it. That was it for him. So he did a few more books after Her Frankenstein, but that's it. But that's the type of book that we're hoping to do, and it's the type of thing that I find compelling about horror stuff, and that's the connection for me between Ito and him is that ability to tap into an idea that is at both specific and compelling in a universal way, and that it can be applicable across all different things. And obviously,
can you give us a synopsis without spoiling much?
I'll read you the blurb, or I'll read you the synopsis.
Yeah,
here.
What's the tag on it?
Little Tetsuo is a wimpy mess. His parents don't love him. He meets the beautiful Kimiko, an ailing teenage girl obsessed with movies and mayhem in equal amounts. She doesn't love Tetsuo either, or anyone other than herself, but she needs him. So Tetsuo becomes the man she wants, the monster she wants. He becomes Her Frankenstein.
Yeah, and that one, like the kind of the abusive nature of it, is what I found really compelling. And one of my favorite modern manga artists that I'm obsessed with is Shuzo Oshimi. And if people, I know you haven't read his stuff yet, but if people know his stuff, there's a similarity there in the kind of themes that he goes back to over and over in his work. So it's really interesting to see, oh my God, this one's from like the 60s, because I thought Shuzo Oshimi is like, he's pushing the boundaries, he's creating his own lane. and it was like, oh no, there's a precedent for this that's about as intense and about as chilling. And I think it's being a little bit more grounded in the real world rather than having the supernatural element makes it even more psychologically and thematically relevant and interesting to me. And something I guess Junji Ito has that too. Like you could have this horror in any age, but the way humans interact with other humans is always going to be something that can speak across any time. And I think her Frankenstein, yeah, like still feels very relevant to me.
Well, it has been printed. It is shipped right now, and it is available for pre-order. So please check it out. Hope you do check it out. Didn't intend to make this a infomercial about her Frankenstein, but damn, I mean, we've been working on this book for a while and haven't gotten to talk to it. I'm sure I've made many errors in my off-the-cuff thing here. You can let me
Ryan
know.
Holmberg, I'm sure he'll have an essay in the back of that, right?
No, this is actually a quite amazing essay from a gentleman who's a cartoonist, Kawakatsu Tokushige, who's an editor and also a cartoonist, and a really great essay about history of the time period and basically like how does this story come out of a marketplace aimed at teenage girls.
And any mistakes that you made in your off-the-cuff commentary will be corrected when you read the essay.
Apologies to everybody, and huge thanks to Junji Ito, I mean, incredible artist and you know, stand-up guy, and very happy that he blurbed the book. He blurbed the Japanese edition of the book, actually, and you know, I'm not sure if this was a influence on him or not, but definitely has resonance with his work, and I think people who enjoy his stuff will also enjoy this. So, and
Thanks for watching along, and we will now jump to a commercial for that book.
Back to the land, let's get away, just for one day. Let me see you stripped down to the bone. Let me see you stripped down to the bone.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.